Imagine a world where economic liberalization is a facade for Western domination. Intriguing, isn't it? Now let's peel back the layers of this complex concept, starting with what economic liberalization actually entails. It's essentially the lessening of government regulations and restrictions in an economy in exchange for greater participation of private entities. The idea is that as businesses gain more freedom, they become more efficient and the economy grows. Sounds great, right? Well, let's delve a little deeper. Throughout the late 20th century, Western nations, particularly those forming the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank, began advocating for economic liberalization in developing countries. One of the most significant instances of this was the implementation of structural adjustment programs in Africa. These programs were economic policies that these countries had to follow in order to secure loans from the World Bank and the IMF. The policies included a range of fiscal and monetary measures, such as reducing government spending, controlling inflation, and promoting free trade. On the surface, they appeared to be well-intentioned efforts to stabilize economies and promote growth. But let's consider the context. These were countries grappling with the aftermath of colonialism, struggling to establish their own economic identities. Suddenly, they were being asked to conform to Western economic ideals, with little regard for their unique circumstances and challenges. So we have to ask, was this truly about helping these nations prosper? Was it about bringing the benefits of free trade and open markets to the global south? Or was there something more going on beneath the surface? Remember, the Western world promoted these programs as a pathway to prosperity. But was it all for the benefit of those nations, or was there an ulterior motive? As we peel back the veil of liberalization, we'll begin to see the complex and often uncomfortable answers to these questions. The reality of economic liberalization was far from the promised land of prosperity for many nations. Let's peel back the layers of this complex issue, starting with the Mexican financial crisis of 1994. This crisis serves as a stark example of the negative impacts of economic liberalization on developing countries. Mexico, a rapidly developing nation at the time, was encouraged to liberalize its economy by Western powers. The promise? Increased prosperity through free trade and foreign investment. The result? A financial crisis that shook the nation and sent ripples throughout the global economy. Economic liberalization policies, such as the removal of trade barriers and deregulation, were intended to stimulate growth. Instead, they led to an economic bubble. When the bubble burst, it left a trail of devastation. Businesses closed, jobs were lost, and the Mexican peso plummeted, causing an economic crisis that the country is still recovering from to this day. But why did this happen? The answer lies in the nature of economic liberalization itself. By removing trade barriers, it was hoped that foreign investment would flood in, boosting the economy. However, this sudden influx of investment led to a rapid expansion of the economy, creating an unsustainable bubble. Additionally, the deregulation of the financial sector left the Mexican economy vulnerable to external shocks. When the United States raised its interest rates in 1994, it triggered a mass withdrawal of foreign investment from Mexico, causing the bubble to burst. The Mexican financial crisis is just one example of how Western-imposed liberalization policies can lead to economic instability and crisis in developing nations. Other countries, such as Argentina and Thailand, have experienced similar crises due to these policies. This paints a grim picture of the hidden cost of economic liberalization, what was touted as a path to prosperity often led to economic instability, poverty, and inequality. For many nations, the benefits of liberalization were overshadowed by these devastating consequences. So the question arises, was economic liberalization a tool for Western exploitation? The answer is complex and multifaceted, but one thing is clear. The cost of economic liberalization was far greater than many nations were led to believe. Wars are never simple, and often they are not as they seem. This statement rings especially true when we delve into the intricate connections between warfare, economic interests, and the political maneuvers of Western nations. Let's take a journey back in time and use the Iraq War as a case study. This war, which began in 2003, was justified by Western powers on the premise of disarming Iraq of weapons of mass destruction. However, these weapons were never found. What unfolded instead was a narrative that starkly contrasted the proclaimed rationale for the war. In the aftermath, what we saw was the control of Iraq's vast oil resources shift into the hands of Western companies. A treasure trove of black gold, Iraq has the 5th largest proven oil reserves in the world. The war facilitated the entrance of Western oil companies into Iraq, a country that had previously nationalized its oil industry and kept it off limits to foreign exploitation for over 4 decades. But the cost was high. The war resulted in the loss of hundreds of thousands of lives and destabilized an entire region. The repercussions are still felt today, with ongoing conflict and the rise of extremist groups. And yet, the economic gain for Western corporations has been substantial. This pattern of exploiting conflict for economic gain is not unique to Iraq. It's a recurring theme in the annals of history, where the machinery of war is often fueled by the thirst for resources and power. The war drums beat, not to the rhythm of justice or liberation, but to the cadence of corporate interests and geopolitical strategy. These wars are not just battles fought on distant lands, they are conflicts that reshape global dynamics, influence economies, and impact lives far beyond the immediate combat zones. So, what's the real cost of these wars and who truly benefits? As we delve deeper into this question, we begin to uncover a narrative that challenges our understanding of war and its true purpose. Democracy, the Western world's shining beacon, often has a different face behind closed doors. Let's delve into the paradoxical nature of the West's advocacy for democratic values. You see, while these nations emphasize the importance of democracy, human rights, and the rule of law, there's a stark contrast in how they align their geopolitical alliances. Take, for instance, the United States' relationship with Saudi Arabia. The US is a nation that prides itself on being the torchbearer of democracy, freedom, and human rights. It has, on numerous occasions, intervened in other nations' affairs under the guise of these principles. Yet, it maintains a close alliance with Saudi Arabia, a country known for its authoritarian regime and human rights abuses. Saudi Arabia, a nation where freedom of speech can be a luxury and women's rights are severely constrained, receives significant military and economic support from the US. This partnership has persisted for decades, despite numerous human rights organizations highlighting the Saudi regime's oppressive tactics. This contradiction raises a pertinent question. Why would a nation that champions democratic values support an authoritarian regime? The answer lies in the realm of geopolitics and economic interests. Saudi Arabia is one of the world's largest oil producers, and it holds significant sway in the Middle East, a region of strategic importance to the US. Therefore, the support for Saudi Arabia, despite its human rights abuses, underscores a glaring hypocrisy. It's a clear demonstration of how economic and strategic interests can override the principles of democracy and human rights. This is not an isolated case either. Over the years, many Western nations have shown a similar pattern of behavior, supporting non-democratic regimes when it suits their interests, while preaching the virtues of democracy to the rest of the world. So, we find ourselves at an uncomfortable crossroads, where the ideals of democracy are held high, but the reality often tells a different story. And it forces us to ask, is this the democracy the Western world stands for, or is it a mask for hypocrisy? Now, you know the truth, but what can you do about it? This burning question may be sitting heavily on your mind, and rightly so. The veil has been lifted, the cost of economic liberalization and the war machine laid bare. The question of democracy or hypocrisy has been raised. But awareness is only the first step on the ladder of change. The next step is education. And not just any education, but self-guided, open-minded education. You must delve into the depths of these issues, examine them from every angle, and form your own informed opinions. It's easy to accept what is spoon-fed to us by mainstream narratives, but it requires courage to question, to challenge, and to seek the truth that lies beneath the surface. And you have that courage. Knowledge is not a privilege, but a right. And with this right, you have the power to enlighten others, to spread awareness, and to spark conversations that matter. There are a plethora of resources available for you to expand your understanding. Libraries, online platforms, documentaries, books, research papers, and even podcasts. Take advantage of these resources. Learn from diverse perspectives. Engage in discussions, ask questions, seek answers. Remember, change is not a solitary endeavor. It is a collective effort. Your voice, your understanding, your actions, they matter. They contribute to a larger dialogue, a global movement. Taking action doesn't always mean grand gestures. It can be as simple as sharing an informative article on social media, or as impactful as joining a policy advocacy group. It's about using your knowledge, your voice, and your power to affect change in whatever way you can. The world isn't as black and white as it seems, but with knowledge comes power, and with power comes the ability to make a change. So go forth and use your newfound understanding as a tool for change. Because the world needs more people like you. People who are not afraid to challenge the status quo, to speak truth to power, and to demand a better, fairer world.